Good morning, class. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 2, Budgeting as part of the planning process. In Chapter 2 of your textbook, I want you to be sure and review all the budget definitions that are provided. What I would like to spend time on in this video are a few of the types of budgets, and then mostly the various reports that are important to properly manage the finances of a nonprofit. Be sure and review the PowerPoints as well. Types of budgets. All budgets are divided into two parts, revenue and expense. The difference is the net or the surplus or deficit. Often nonprofit staff will just focus on the revenue budget or just the expense budget in a meeting, that they are two sides of the same coin. The operating budget is the budget that is passed by the board of directors and is the budget used in day-to-day reporting, day-to-day operations. A capital budget is completely separate with its own revenues and expenses and is concerned with long-term projects with one-time costs, such as building or renovating a building. Capital budgets are in effect linked to the operating budget because any ongoing costs from the project will be transferred to the operating budget, such as maintenance of a new building and utility costs. So there's a link there between the two. We have different formats for the revenue and expense budgets, and what you see in the Higher Education Budget Harvest is a line item budget, which is the oldest format there is. There are also program budgets. Nonprofits often create program budgets so that revenue and expense is tracked by program. In Chapter 2, you can see a program budget. The budget literature also talks about performance-based budgets, but those performance-based budgets are not well developed and rarely used in the nonprofit sector. Let's talk about reporting. The most important report is the monthly variance report. And any newly appointed ED should very quickly ask to see the variance report, which lists both the revenue and expense budget and compares these to the actuals. That is, what has actually been spent for a given week or month throughout the year. When I was an ED, I looked at the monthly variance report at the end of every month of the fiscal year. I wanted to understand what revenues came in and what remained outstanding. I wanted to know what had been spent out of the expense budget and what remained to be spent. And most importantly, I wanted to know if the spending was within bounds. What does that mean, within bounds? It means if the nonprofit is 1 month into the fiscal year, then the expense budget should show spending to be about 1/12 or 8.3% of the budget, of the expense budget. You can see that in this Chapter 2. If, on the other hand, the salaries for a few of the staff are more than 8.3% of the budget, such as 10%, then I know we are spending too much on the salaries according to the budget, and we need to correct the error. Is the spending correct and we did not budget correctly, in which case we need to change the budget? Or are we paying more than we should be for those staff? What is going on? The variance report provides excellent evidence of what is occurring fiscally in this nonprofit. Now, when we look at the revenue budget for a nonprofit, it is not so simple as to say, after 1 month, we should have collected 8.3% of the revenue. On the revenue side, the variance report is not as useful. However, it can give you signs of problems. If you expected a foundation grant in January, but there are no revenues from that grant in January, then you need to resolve that issue. As a manager, I do think that the variance report is the most important report that you can use to control your nonprofit's fiscal situation, particularly on the expense side. There are other reports that are very important. The monthly cash flow management report. This report is all about liquidity. Liquidity means cash. Nonprofits often have unstable revenue streams. A foundation changes its plans and chooses not to fund the nonprofit for the first time in years. Contributions have fallen off as a favored ED has retired. A government contract was canceled when Congress did not appropriate the funding. The list of why revenues fall can be endless. Since nonprofits are dependent upon revenue streams that can change fairly quickly, nonprofits must closely watch their cash to be sure that there is enough cash to pay that month's payroll. We do this through the cash flow management report. We first make a projection each month of the fiscal year for what we expect to collect in cash and what we will spend. They're projections. This report tells the ED in which months cash is predicted to be low and in which months cash is sufficient for their needs. Indeed, it is possible for a nonprofit to run out of cash while at the end of the year the budget is balanced. This is because it is difficult to predict when revenue comes in. In Chapter 3 on page 60, there is a copy of a monthly cash flow management report for you to examine. The monthly performance report is another report that is important for you. It is essential that the ED establishes ways to measure staff performance. Governments and foundations often require performance data, and the ED, in order to make future plans, needs to understand how well programs are running and staff is performing. It is not easy to create performance indicators, but it's crucial that a nonprofit measure performance on a monthly basis. A simple performance indicator is the number of clients per month. That's an easy one. But how well are the clients doing under the care of this particular nonprofit? That is much harder. And we will discuss that more when we read Chapter 10 on performance. Why do we do this monthly? Because it's possible to observe problems and have the time to correct those problems within the fiscal year if the staff start using monthly reports soon enough. But if the ED waits until 6 months or 8 months to review performance or to review any of the other reports, then it's more difficult to solve the problems within the fiscal year. There are annual reports that the nonprofit has to pay attention to. Concerning the federal government, the Form 990 must be sent to the IRS every year. There are forms for small nonprofits. The Form 990-N is for very small nonprofits, less than $50,000 in revenue, and has only 8 questions. The Form 990-EZ is for slightly larger nonprofits, for those nonprofits that have less than $200,000 in revenues and $500,000 in assets, and is a 2-page form. Other than that, the nonprofit must file the Form 990, a 12-page form. And then there are state requirements. Each state has different requirements. Virginia does not require a nonprofit incorporated in Virginia to file the IRS Form 990 with the state. However, Virginia does require an annual report, and a form for that purpose is mailed to the nonprofit by the Virginia State Corporation Commission. Nonprofits are eligible for sales tax exemption, and that exemption must be renewed every 5 years in Virginia. In addition, Virginia encourages nonprofits to maintain a Virginia registered agent, who is a person responsible for receiving legal documents. Usually that is a lawyer, who might be a friend of the nonprofit. Many nonprofits also register at the Virginia Office of Charitable and Regulatory Program to conduct charitable solicitations. For those interested, Virginia's URL for nonprofits is posted on course content under Class 2. Now I want to talk about fiscally hard times. Budgeting during times of fiscal stress is not easy. A friend of mine once said that budgeting is choice within constraints. When the economy is booming, nonprofits do not envision many restraints in their budgets. They attempt to make their dreams their reality and spend a great deal of money. However, in times of fiscal stress, nonprofits can witness a formidable drop in revenue. Government contracts are cut, contributions drop off, foundations change their goals when asking for proposals. These constraints are very real. The revenue side can fall very quickly in the nonprofit sector. A downward shift in the economy can be a steep, dramatic slide for nonprofits because they are so dependent upon contributions and government contracts. There is a long-term trend in America that is worrisome for nonprofits. The American middle class has been losing ground for many years, and this speaks to the way nonprofits are funded, many by individuals. The Pew Research Center in 2016 examined the size of the middle class in the U.S. metropolitan areas from 2000 to 2014. The share of adults living as middle class fell in 203 of the 229 U.S. metropolitan areas. This widespread erosion of the middle class affects the amount of contributions given to charities. I encourage nonprofit leaders to create a large rainy day fund. Although some experts think the amount needed to cover 3 to 6 months of expenses is sufficient in a rainy day fund, I think in these times nonprofits should save a year's worth of expenses. When the economy fails, as it did in fiscal year 2020 during the pandemic, a nonprofit that has saved substantial amounts of cash is far better protected from those that did not save adequately. So let's talk about your homework. For your homework, it's Higher Education Harvest again, and I've already described to you that I want you to project revenue and expenses for fiscal year 2000 by creating a plan that governs governance, management, and program. You could be quite creative with this plan, and I encourage you to think about it with others on the discussion board. I also want you to write a memo as the executive director addressed to the board explaining your plans for fiscal year 2000. Please keep the memo to fewer than 3 pages. So next week you will turn in a spreadsheet with all 3 years side by side and a memo. I'll see you on the discussion boards.